My name is Mark Lomas. I'm a cloud solutions architect at Probrand. I have a finger in many pies. I've worked in on-premises solutions, I've worked in cloud solutions, I've worked in cybersecurity. So I've got a number of areas that I specialize in. Obviously today we've heard a lot about cybersecurity from a variety of different angles. We've heard about the technical angle, we've heard about the cyber insurance angle. We've heard about the money involved. So obviously a very serious topic. So with that in mind, I'll keep things serious. This is a loaf of bread. I'm giving my best material today. I'm going to focus in on foodstuffs at the beginning here. I hope that's okay with it. No, not impressed? You've seen this before. All right. Well, how about we move on to a long egg? No? Look at it. Brilliant, that is. A long egg, an unnaturally... This is a real food product, by the way. You can actually get this, and you can buy them as pre-packaged food products. And why am I talking to you about foodstuffs at the start of my presentation? Let's go back to look at the bread for a moment. This is a fairly standard loaf of bread, right? Fairly standard slice of white bread that you can buy in the store. Now, there's a serious point to this, which is that this is an example of standardization. This is a loaf of bread manufactured using the Chorley wood bread process. You might have heard of this. This is essentially a process that allows you to manufacture bread in an automated, mechanized manner. But that gives us more than just the benefits of being able to speed up the manufacturing process. It also means that we know a lot about the end product. The product is very standardized. We know its size, we know its shape. So that means that we're not just able to handle the manufacturing process, we can also look after things like packaging, shipping. We know the exact specifications of the product. Having that automation, having that standardization brings us a range of benefits. And it's standardization that I'm going to be focusing in on in my presentation this afternoon, because it does bring us a number of benefits. Specifically, we're interested in things like uniformity. We want to have in our IT infrastructures, in our IT estates, a degree of standardization, a degree of uniformity, predictability. And one of the main reasons for that, of course, is to try and eliminate error. That could be human error, it could be error in our systems designs, there could be a number of different areas where error can creep in. If we think about human error, for example, let's say we're doing something fairly simple, like just deploying a server, deploying a virtual machine into an IT environment that we're operating. Very easy to do this in a manual way these days. We can just waltz up to one of our consoles, maybe VMware, for example, and we can just request a new virtual machine be deployed, and we can go through that fairly easily. But if we think about it, our IT admin, with the little crown on their head there, has a number of different tasks that they need to go through. And you might not necessarily think about these tasks, because if you are an IT admin and you've been looking after things like servers on a VMware or Hyper-V platform, things like deploying a new virtual machine become kind of second nature. You can rattle through these things very quickly, very repeatably. It's very easy to do. But there are actually a range of different tasks that you go through. You might not necessarily be consciously thinking about them because, as I say, they can become second nature. But there's a number of different tasks that you go through. I've put some of them up on the screen here. This isn't by any means an exhaustive list. I'm sure we can all think of additional steps that go into the deployment of a new server, a new virtual machine, or indeed other aspects of infrastructure that we might deploy into our IT estates. But very quickly, we start to get into things where there can be an implication for security, particularly if mistakes are made. Which network is something deployed onto? What kind of updates are being put in? Have you got the patch management all sorted? Have you got the antivirus deployed? Have you done any operating system hardening? And like I say, this isn't even an exhaustive list. There might be all sorts of things that you're going to be doing when you're deploying any aspect of your IT, where you need to go through some manual steps, and there is always the possibility for human error, particularly if we're doing things manually. And of course, this is one of the reasons why we have various different layers to our security, because we want to know that if something happens in one aspect of our cybersecurity, something goes wrong, that it's not the only thing that's there to catch us. It's why we don't just deploy antivirus. It's why we don't just deploy a firewall. It's why we don't just do patch management. We do multiple different aspects of cybersecurity. If one element fails, something else will be able to creep in to help us. But of course, I'm sure we'd all recognize that good design can help improve the security of our IT environments. So having some processes in place, having some uniformity, having some standardization can be of big benefit to helping improve cybersecurity in our environments. This is where automation can help. We might want to remove some of those manual processes. We might do that through orchestration solutions that can help implement some of our IT infrastructure components in a more repeatable, more automated fashion. And when we do that, we can also implement policy engines so that when we are deploying aspects of our IT, those new deployments can be subject to the policy that we want to implement, both at deployment time and in an ongoing compliancy basis, that we can continuously evaluate and review our IT infrastructure against the policy that we want to set. Now, examples of some of the changes that come in, I mean, let's say, for example, we're deploying a virtual machine in Azure. Now, straight away, we're not necessarily thinking about things like a physical host server that virtual machine is going to be deployed onto. That's abstracted away. We just pick a model, in inverted commas, of virtual machine. And whilst we might choose a geography for that particular server to be deployed into, we don't think about a server cluster or a physical host for that VM to go onto. That's abstracted away. That's all orchestrated by the deployment tools and resource management solution that Microsoft provides. Same deal for the storage. You can pick a type of virtual hard drive for our new virtual machine that we're creating here, but we don't need to think about the underlying storage cluster or SAN or RAID array or anything like that this is going to go down onto. This is all abstracted away. But of course, it's not just the actual creation process. It's not just the process of speccing it up and saying, I'd like a new VM, please. We're also looking at this from the angle of security. And this is where we can get to think about the design, think about the architecture. Now, this rather complex looking diagram, if you go to Microsoft and say, well, how should I set things up? You know, sticking with Azure for a moment. How should I set things up in my Azure environment? Well, Microsoft will have their own architecture stacks that they can suggest as a design. This diagram here is an example of one of Microsoft's enterprise scale landing zones. Now, I think the key word there is very definitely enterprise. There's a lot of components here in their enterprise landing zone. And that's before you necessarily get to actually deploying your resources into this. This is what they would suggest you set up as sort of your estate. But if you go to them and say, well, what's the small business equivalent of this? They don't have anything. There's no real small business equivalent that they can come along with here. But there are bits that we can pick out of this. If you look closely, a lot of the different elements on the screen here have the word policy against them. It's a little bit fuzzy on the screen here, but trust me, there's lots and lots of different elements that say policy assignment. Policy, policy, policy is repeated again and again throughout this diagram. And policy is something that we can implement in all of our environments to help review against. There's policy management engines, again, in things like Microsoft Azure here, that we can validate and vet against using either pre-built policies or policies that we can set up ourselves to review the overall configuration of our environment. And then there's policy engines that you can set up to review what's going on inside the virtual machine. So Microsoft Auto Manage, for example, is one way that you can do this, to actually review what's going on inside the actual virtual machines that you create. Because, of course, when you're in Azure or AWS or any hyperscale cloud platform, although the infrastructure is provided to you as a service, what you put inside your virtual machines is still very much up to you. It's still your VMs, it's your applications, it's your data, it's your stuff. So you'll still want to think about these as things to secure and manage and audit. These kind of management tools can help. But of course, not everybody is going to be pure cloud. Many organizations will still be on-premises. And many organizations will find that either a hybrid or continuing with an on-premises solution can be right for them. Many of these kind of management tools from environments like Azure, for example, can be extended to your on-premises environment. So through solutions like Azure Arc, for example, you can extend some of the management capabilities that are available in the cloud, in Azure, in the Azure Resource Manager. You can extend them to cover your on-premises estates, or indeed to cover a multi-cloud deployment. If you decide that you like the kind of management experiences that you're getting inside Azure, but you are also making use of resources available in things like Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, you might decide that you want to extend the management frameworks that you have available to you in Azure to those other cloud platforms. And again, this is going to help from a management perspective, and this is another area where you can help extend and improve your ability to make cybersecurity improvements. And it's not just extending cloud management platforms into an on-premises environment. There are other ways that you might improve the way that you automate and orchestrate your on-premises environment. So, for example, you might choose to shift more to a subscription infrastructure style model, a kind of hybrid financed platform like, for example, HP GreenLake. This is an example of the deployment tools that you get in HP GreenLake, where you can again choose that you want to deploy a particular type of virtual machine rather than speccing this up from scratch. Some of the automation is delivered here to abstract away the specific areas of the platform where the solutions are going down onto. You can just pick a virtual machine model, pick a VM plan, as HP call it for their GreenLake solution, and it will then decide the rest as to where everything goes. You've then got the ability to include things like policies, workflows, to help automate, to deliver some repeatability in the way that you set up aspects of your infrastructure. Again, helping to improve the likelihood that you can remove some of the human error from this process, even going so far as to have application blueprints that you can deploy into the estate. So there's a variety of different things that we can do here to manage and improve the processes that we have in how we look after our IT infrastructure, whether it be in the cloud, whether it be on premises, or whether it be a hybrid mix of the two. There are some opportunities that we can take advantage of to help remove some of the manual processes and hopefully help remove and eliminate some of the human error possibilities that are in the mix here. Now, it's not just on the back-end infrastructure that we can help improve some of the processes that we have. We can also think about the client side, how we roll out new PCs, for example. In the past, we might have tried to automate using things like imaging. Now, if you've ever used imaging as a solution for deploying PCs into your estate, you'll know that there can be some weaknesses here, particularly if those images become stale or if there are additional manual processes that creep in. I had an example on one occasion where a customer wanted us to supply and deploy a batch of new PCs. They supplied their image and they wanted us to deploy that onto their machines. And they provided their documentation to us as to what they wanted us to do with those devices. Step one was to image the machine. And there were then 32 pages of additional manual steps that needed to be done to those devices after the imaging. It rather undermined the point of imaging. It was supposed to take away all of those manual processes, but it didn't necessarily do that. Now, we've got newer and more modern solutions available these days for how we can onboard devices that help us leave things like imaging in the past, solutions like Windows Autopilot, for example. And there are, of course, other solutions for mobile platforms from Apple and Google, all following a similar pathway that you simply turn on the device and it onboards itself into your environment. And one of the key components of this is that once the onboarding has been completed, following the processes that are defined in our onboarding profile, it then leaves the device automatically enrolled into our environment through our identity management platform. Perhaps that's Azure Active Directory. In our device management environment, maybe that's Microsoft Endpoint Manager, Intune. And immediately that means that the device will also be subject to the policies that we set up. We might have compliancy policies defined, for example, that define the security that the machine must meet in order to be allowed into our environment. And that, twinned with conditional access rules, means that we can say only devices that are compliant can be allowed into our environment. If a machine falls outside of compliance with our policy, it's not allowed in. Now, this same kind of solution can also be used for bring your own device. If you've got personal devices, you want them to be enrolled in such a way that they will also be subject to compliance policies and conditional access. All of these solutions are going to be available. But again, whether we're talking about personal devices or corporate-owned devices, you want them to be subject to these kind of, tests to make sure that they pass and can therefore be allowed into our environment. And what we can do with these solutions is make sure that the response is automatic too. Rather than it simply resulting in an alert that ends up in your inbox that you have to action, but in the meantime, the device, potentially at risk, is still being used to gain access to our applications, to our data, we can automatically lock that machine out. and say, if that device is a risk, we want it to be locked out straight away until we can remediate the problem, and then it can be allowed back in again. This helps close some of the risk gaps that can be present for endpoint devices. Now, all of this isn't meant to suggest that we're doing away with the people power element of looking after our IT environments. After all, when we're talking about automation, that question immediately crops up. Well, what am I doing? If I'm currently looking after deploying servers and managing that environment, well, what am I doing now if that's automated? What am I doing now if we're orchestrating some of those processes? If I'm not spending as much time doing that, what am I doing instead? Well, I suppose, to a certain extent, what you're going to be doing instead is everything that you've heard already today. Think about all of those sessions that you've been in talking about cybersecurity so far today. One of the questions that you might find yourself asking is, of course, do I have the budget? But another question will be, do I have the time? Do I have the time to evaluate my cybersecurity? Do I have the time to invest auditing my systems? Do I have the time to invest in crafting new policies, figuring out what level of access we're going to be giving to employees or which levels of access we're going to decide not to do? Do you have the time? Wouldn't it be good if you could give yourself some more time back? If we can automate some of our processes, we can help improve the way in which we spend our time and give ourselves a little bit more resource available to invest in reviewing and implementing better cybersecurity. Now, this speaks to some of the myths that can sometimes occur around cloud, which is one of the most obvious myths around cloud, I suppose, is it's cheap. Hosted is just cheap, right? It's just a cheap way of getting IT. It's cheaper, significantly cheaper. It's managed. Someone else is looking after it for me. Not necessarily. Like I say, if you're deploying servers into Azure, for example, they're still your servers, they're still your VMs. Backup is included, and antivirus, and all of it. It's all just included. I don't need to buy that separately anymore. I'll just get that for free, right? No. There is no such thing as a free lunch. But that doesn't mean that there aren't ways to save with cloud. And in particular with cybersecurity, there are plenty of opportunities that come up. It's just that they might be slightly different to what you think. Let's say you've got Microsoft 365, for example. Many of those subscription services will come with some of the benefits included, some of which I've alluded to today. And if you've already got access to 365 Business Premium or one of the enterprise plans, then you probably already have MDM, you probably already have identity management, you probably already have compliance policies and conditional access and all of these capabilities available. It just requires that you enable these solutions and implement them in your environment. But they're already there, ready for you to take advantage of. So the foundation of technologies that you have available to you is broader. You're going to be spending some time implementing those kind of capabilities, improving your cybersecurity, improving the value of security capabilities that you're delivering to your organization. You've got some policies to craft. What kind of compliancy policies will be appropriate for your environment? What kind of conditional access rules might be appropriate for your systems? And some new services to deliver. There'll be new technologies, there'll be additional capabilities, all of which will be available to you as part of these kind of cloud services, some of which you can integrate with your on-premises estates as part of your hybrid solutions. Some organizations might put no actual resources into the cloud at all, but still take advantage of some of the cybersecurity capabilities when it comes to delivering and implementing that. So hybrid can simply mean, to some people, taking advantage of those cloud technologies to deliver onto their on-premises estates security services that they need. There's ongoing evaluation because, of course, the cloud changes. The nature of cybersecurity threats change, so the nature of some of the security capabilities that get built into these services will evolve over time as well, which is why I've put up here that it can be a bit of a moving target. Cybersecurity is a moving target. Cloud technology is a moving target. We get lots of moving targets to deal with in the world of IT. But it's technology. It evolves, it moves on, of course it does. So 'twas ever thus, I suppose. Now, in summary, shift your focus to the architecture. That diagram that I put up earlier, the sort of Microsoft enterprise scale landing zone, doesn't necessarily have to be the aspiration. If you're an enterprise scale organization, then yes, that might be the sort of thing that you're going to be implementing. But for smaller organizations, you're probably not going to be aiming for that kind of implementation. But that doesn't mean that we can't seed some of the elements from that into our environments and deliver a better design to improve our cybersecurity. Looking at things like policies will be a big element of one of the things that you can take advantage of in cloud services. And by policy, I don't just mean the aspects of implementing things like compliancy policies in Intune or Endpoint Manager. You might also be thinking about data handling policies, for example. Certain organizations may be handling certain types of sensitive data, for example. You might be in finance, handling financial data, legal, healthcare, patient records, that sort of thing. There's all sorts of different areas where you might have sensitive data and records to handle. Policy can extend beyond technology into what you expect of your end users. We've mentioned things like security culture today, for example. So if you've got to rely on your end users a little bit to think about what they are expected to handle, the data that they're looking after on a day-to-day basis. We can improve some of the processes that they have available to them, then we can help them reduce the risk of human error in their day-to-day data handling practices as well. Of course, some of this does involve taking advantage of the technology. We can implement training processes that require our users to do certain things. So if they are working with sensitive data, for example, do they need to label the data as such when they're creating those kind of records, that kind of data? But are we providing them the tools to help them do that? And how is that being implemented in our organization? There's plenty of technology available there. It's just a case of taking advantage of that and, again, designing that process for how people will be using it and iterating it in our estate. And of course, it requires a degree of proactive management. Yes, you have to look after this stuff. There's different things for you to do, not necessarily less for you to do. You might automate certain things, but as you take advantage of other aspects of technology that might be available in, again, things like cloud subscriptions, then that's going to provide greater opportunities for you to take advantage of those processes, build new policies, build new services inside your organization, hopefully drive up some of the value that's being delivered here from your IT estate, as well as improving the security posture. Now, Probrand can help in a variety of ways. As alluded to earlier in the panel discussion, you don't necessarily have to be rolling your own security standards. You know, sometimes the most obvious question that I get asked is the simple, straightforward one of, well, how do I get started? You know, if you're just getting started on this journey, if you're trying to understand where to get started, well, there are some straightforward processes that you can engage in. Things like the Cyber Essentials standard is a good one to start with, particularly for small to medium-sized organizations. If you're not sure where to get started, auditing against that standard can be a good way to get things going, because you can then start to look for improvement opportunities, look for any areas where you fall short, and you make usually fairly easy improvements to help make things better, and then achieve that Cyber Essentials accreditation, which you can have that badge displayed there that you've achieved that standard, which other organizations, customers, partners can then see. We can guide you through various security reviews. We've got various different review processes that can be available to help you get started in the IT journey, guide you through that process of getting started in your cyber reviews. We can help assess the risk for you, help look at where you might have any openings that you need to address. And this can be anything from basic risks right through to more advanced things like pen testing that we can help deliver. We can do these things to help look for those risk factors inside your organization to see where you might need to improve. And we can help build policies from experience. So when we're looking at things like crafting policies, whether they be technical in nature or whether they be more applicable to your staff processes, we can help build processes from the experience that we have. We've got those engineering expertise in-house. We've got that design experience in-house that we can bring to bear to help you. So again, if you're just getting started and the question that you're asking is, well, where should I get started? How should I get started? We can help build policies for you rather than necessarily you having to roll your own. Now, that does bring me to the end of my presentation. I don't know if we've got an opportunity for Q&A.
Yes, I think we have. I mean, I've got a million questions to ask about the long egg.
Indeed.
I think I need to get myself some of that, but anyway, that's a separate
I can't tell you where you can buy some.
No, indeed. Probably somewhere in Germany, I think.
Possibly,
you mentioned to me previously. Has anyone got any questions for Mark? Gentleman over here, if we could just get a mic over to you. That would be awesome.
Sorry.
Brilliant, thank you.
Hey, Mark. Just a quick question. You mentioned the cloud myths and I think the backup one. So things like Microsoft Office 365, so people use OneDrive, let's say, day to day, and that's something organizations encourage now rather than saving locally to their laptops. Do people overlook the backup side on those kind of things? So Office 365, where is that backed up to? And is that just a myth that some people think it is backed up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way that I can describe what you get out of the box with 365, I would refer to more as deletion protection than true backup. You know, there's a certain grace period that if somebody deletes something, that it will be retained and you can get it back, but it's not what you would refer to as true backup. And that grace period is not configurable by the IT administrator. So you get a period of 90 odd days, for example, I think for some of the services in 365. If you want more than that, if you want 6 months, if you want a year, if you want multiple years, no, you're not going to get that in the box. You're going to have to look to a third-party backup provider to deliver that service. That, for example, could be Probrand Managed Backup or some other backup service. But if you are looking for more than just, as I say, what I would refer to as just deletion protection, then you'll need an additional capability there to provide that kind of backup.
I think that gets overlooked. But not only that, let's say something, God forbid, something happened in the Office 365 environment where they had a crash or something went down and it was not recoverable. Where do you stand in getting your data back?
Yeah, indeed. And there's obviously various SLAs that you have with Microsoft. They're going to look after your access to your data and your availability of your data. When it comes to something that gets lost in some fashion, the question that's going to then be asked is, well, how did it get lost? Did it get lost because somebody deleted it? Did it get lost because of something that's happened on Microsoft's end? Or indeed, has there been a security incident that has done something to your data and put it into that unrecoverable state? There would be a number of questions there that would have to be looked at to determine, well, whose fault is it? Is it Microsoft's fault? Is it your fault? Or is it just nobody's fault, but it's not Microsoft's fault either, so they're not going to be liable for giving you your data back or financially compensating you? There's got to be a variety of questions around that. But again, if you wanted something that's totally separate from Microsoft, that's got another copy of your data that's backed it up, going back to those sort of standard basic principles around backup, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah, because you might have a data retention policy that you need to keep something for a year or 2 years.
Yeah, and certainly Microsoft do have some capabilities there as well. If you've got certain retention policies, some of the services, for example, in Microsoft SharePoint and other aspects of Microsoft 365, if you're looking for some document management that's going to say, well, I need to have a, for example, legal hold on some data, you can configure services like that so that the data does get kind of locked and retained for the period that you define. But that's slightly different from backup. That's still the live data that's there on the platform. It's there, it's still in the document library, for example, that the file was originally saved into. It's just now got a kind of very sophisticated read-only flag on it to say this can't be changed, it can't be deleted, it's a locked file and has to stay that way for X number of years maybe, depending on your policy.